Good afternoon, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good day and God bless you. Let's get into the news. President Donald Trump is suing journalist Bob Woodward for releasing recordings of interviews that he gave to the journalism journalists in 2019 and 2020, claiming he never agreed to those tapes being shared with the public. And a lawsuit filed today against Woodward, Simon & Schuster Inc., and the publisher's parent company Paramount Global. Trump claimed that although he had given Woodward consent to record their conversations, for the sole purpose of the book, that didn't extend to packaging those recordings as an audiobook. This case centers on Mr. Woodward's systemic usurpation, manipulation and exploitation of audio of President Trump. This is what Trump's lawyers wrote. The complaint alleges violations of Trump's copyright interests and accuses Woodward and the publisher of unjustly profiting from the tapes. Trump is seeking just under $50 million in damages, $49 million. From the other report, I read a figure his lawyers calculated assuming Woodward would sell 2 million copies of the audiobook at a don't download price of $2,499. Interesting how that's said right there, how that's done. I'm not going to digress, but if you know about my past, I have a degree in economics. And I was my past career life, not my past like it's something nefarious. So this is pretty simple math here. And I assure you, if this goes to trial, they will bring in folks like myself. I was an analyst that provide the information for the expert witness in court. Trump participated in 19 interviews in person or by phone with Woodward between December 2019 and August 2020, as well as in 2016, when he was still a candidate. According to the complaint, Woodward's book Rage, published a month after the last interview. In October 22, Simon & Schuster released the audiobook of the recording, the Trump tapes. Now there's some alleged selective editing going on here as well. The Bloomberg is reporting that in the case, Woodward is also accused of misrepresenting at least one of their exchanges in the audiobook by editing out portions of the full interview. Now we know that Trump had complained about this in the past. He went to social shortly after the audiobook came out, making the claim that he had never given Woodward permission. Woodward told CNN that they were done voluntarily and it was all on the record. So here's how the case is going. Trump's attorneys, Robert Garson and Yanina Zilberman, filed the case in the Pensacola Division of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Florida. Okay. So Trump, because he's in at Mar-a-Lago and is in Palm Beach County, has typically filed these lawsuits in his home court, the Southern District of Florida. He's claiming jurisdiction in Pensacola, but he's a Florida resident, and the defendants generally do business there. So this is a cool thing. He usually doesn't miss out, but he's doing it up in the Northern District, saying that the defendants generally do business up in that area. And guess what? President Trump, obviously he's got smart lawyers and smart people. And I think we're all tired. President Trump getting injustice because he goes to these corrupt churches and corrupt courts. Yeah. I'm talking to you, Southern District of New York and New York in general. The Pensacola Division 3 judges who handle civil cases are all Republican nominees. You got Kent Wetherall, II, who was nominated by Trump. You've got Casey Rogers, who was confirmed under President George W. Bush. And then you've got Senior Judge Roger Vinson, who was nominated by President Ronald Reagan. He takes a smaller caseload, and it has been assigned to Vinson. So let's see what happens. President Trump doesn't have a great track record when it comes to suing journalists and the media coverage as a whole. But he does have a pending $475 million defamation lawsuit against CNN. And he does have one of 3 cases still pending. So in 2020, his campaign filed libel lawsuits against Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN. And a judge has yet to rule on the Post motion to dismiss, but the other ones in New York and Georgia have been thrown out. So that's what President Trump is up to. And that is the latest lawsuit. Now, folks, we've got quite a bit of Trump news in this episode. See last week, and I didn't report on it because it was nonsensical to me, but Political on the 25th had this article, "The Private Angst Over Donald Trump's Racist Attacks on Elaine Chao Goes Public." And then the sub-headline says, "His rhetoric says a whole lot more about him than it will ever say about Asian Americans." But that was odd. I read that on Politico and I just had whatever it didn't report on it wasn't that interesting. Then the next day, I saw a USA Today article on the 26th. This is Elaine Chao speaks out about Donald Trump's racist comments on her. I'm thinking, where's this coming from? Well, I thought we were past the Asian hate propaganda. I thought they had run its course already with the virus and all the other things that they were trying to pin President Trump as a racist against Asian Americans, which is ridiculous. Then I remembered that last week as well, President Trump had published his video about his plan to save American education and give power back to parents. And then I realized what's going on here. President Trump said something that's totally great for Asian Americans, and not at all racist against Asian Americans. And so this is yet another attempt to spin the narrative. Let me play what President Trump said. And then it all comes together why Politico and other leftist media outlets last week kind of went unnoticed. No one cared about it, but they were attempting to smear President Trump, yet again, as a racist against Asian Americans. Listen to what he said last week: "Our public schools have been taken over by the radical left maniacs. Here's my plan to save American education, restore power to American parents. First, we will cut federal funding for any school or program pushing critical race theory, gender ideology, or other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content onto our children. We're not going to allow it to happen. Next, I will direct the Department of Justice and Education to open civil rights investigations into any school district that has engaged in race-based discrimination. That includes discrimination against Asian Americans." Okay, folks, President Trump is saying that he is going to, as part of his campaign, he's already campaigning obviously for 2024, that he is going to go to bat for Asian Americans who are discriminated against because of race-based diversity rules in school districts, that because there's a lot of smart Asians, not a racist thing. It's a cultural thing. Asian families value education, and they teach their children discipline so that they work hard in school. Okay, it's a cultural thing, not a racial thing. Because I have plenty of friends from Nigeria. And guess what? Their kids are number 1, number 2, and number 4 in their class. Why? Because my Nigerian friends value education, and their children sacrifice and take education very seriously. It's cultural. But of course, because of race-based admissions and favoritism or whatever, they lower the standards and give preference to people of certain races, blacks, Latinos, or other underserved communities. And they give them preference over people who merit getting into programs, schools, etc. based on race, much to the disadvantage of Asian Americans, families and students who are working hard for scholarships as acceptance, admittance, etc. So President Trump literally goes against racist policies in the school districts that are going to help Asian Americans. And that is why last week we saw this thing once again, using Elaine Chao. Elaine Chao, remember, is the wife of Rhino Supreme Mitch McConnell, and was President Trump's transportation secretary. And yes, she has ties to China. And she's made a lot of money with her family and her father in the shipping business. And pointing out her coziness with China is not racist. But that's why they were trying to paint him as a racist last week, because he literally was working for and on behalf of Asian Americans. Isn't that something? Okay, folks, there's a whole bunch of news here today on President Trump. Let's get into it. The President Trump is suing Bob Woodward is just the tip of the iceberg. We have this as well. Trump used records request to hinder IRS releases of his tax returns. So you'll recall last year, literally about a month ago, right before the Democrats lost power and the GOP House was about to be sworn in. And the power is transferring from Skeletor Nancy Pelosi over to the eventual after the week-long fight-or-so or 5-day fight. Again, Kevin McCarthy in there. They had released President Trump's tax returns. Well, we're finding out that President Trump had used FOIA requests, and some pretty unusual ways of slowing down and finding out what was really going on. And they're making a mountain out of this molehill. But let me break it down for you. President Trump had demanded information from the IRS as he was preparing to turn over his personal tax returns to that congressional committee. He did this by papering the agency with a Delusion of Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests, in search of a behind-the-scenes look at deliberations. That's what new documents are showing, and it's being reported today. Now, of course, President Trump smartly is always trying to drag out legal challenges, and other things that the deep state was always trying to do against him. This is the same tactic that the IRS uses, and the government uses against everyone else. The government has the full power and purse of taxpayer money to go after and bury people legally. That's why it's very scary to have the IRS come after you, because they have the full weight and all the legal things to bury you in paperwork, and then you've got to spend money defending yourself. Oftentimes, false charges, and people settle and they get scared. And it's very hard to compete with the government on that. But President Trump was able to do it. He used the public records request, the FOIA request, to get information from his own government. And yes, it is unconventional. Now, the article here is saying because as commander-in-chief, in Liu, the executive branch, he had numerous options to get data from federal agencies. But guess what? Those federal agencies were working against him. So he was using everything at his disposal, including the last resort tool, a FOIA request to get information. So for example, the U.S. tax code gives a president special permission to request taxpayer information from the IRS. But Trump didn't go that route because they were fighting against him. He was ready to pay for the paperwork, as he was willing to pay up to $30,000 in processing fees, which is more than the $25 agencies generally request to furnish the records. He filed a FOIA request in 2019. And, again, a few years later, and this is all has to do with the Democrats trying to slow down the Democrats getting free requests and trying to figure out exactly what they were doing. He was trying to get information about what then House and Ways Means Chairman Richard Neal was doing with the Treasury Department and trying to get every access he could, both internally and using the FOIA requests. Now, there's a whole bunch of detail here, but let me just get to the bottom line here. Okay. Tax lawyers often use FOIA requests to obtain information about internal deliberations over penalties, the appeals process, and other tax matters at the IRS. And President Trump was doing what other people do. This is not they're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. This is not out of the norm. It's just out of the norm that our president would do it because any other president will be able to ask for the information and get it. But guess what? It's out of the norm that the entire alphabet agency in the government will be working against the sitting president. So that is why he had to go that route. Oh, but that's not all, folks. We have also today that President Trump is facing new legal jeopardy, because the Manhattan prosecutors convened a state grand jury to investigate any role he may have played in making hush money payments to you know who, Stormy Daniels, who's back in the news again. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Give me your thoughts below and hit